Hello, I'm Jennifer DeBruyn, and I'm an associate professor in the Department of Biosystems Engineering and Soil Science. Today, I'm sharing with you a short overview on soil biology and how it relates to soil health. I don't know how much you usually think about life under your feet when you're walking through a field or a forest, but hopefully by the time I finish this talk, I will give you a little bit of an appreciation of the diversity, the complexity, and the functional importance of a healthy soil ecosystem. Soil health is defined by the NRCS as the continued capacity of soil to function as a vital living ecosystem that sustains plants, animals, and humans. So very much recognizes that soils are living and alive. But this is not really a new idea. Already back in 1938 in the USDA Yearbook of Agriculture, Charles Kellogg was writing about soil health. He stated that essentially all life depends on the soil. There can be no life without soil and no soil without life. They have evolved together. So if we want to work towards having healthy soils, we need to recognize that soils as the living ecosystems that they are. So let's start by taking a look at soil as a habitat. As we zoom in closer and closer to soil, we see that it's not uniform in nature at all. Instead, it's a complex habitat that consists of mineral and organic particles, living organisms, including plant roots, and pore spaces filled with air and water. From a microbes perspective, soil is very heterogeneous and has properties that can change very rapidly in space and time. And when we zoom in even closer, we see all kinds of life in soil, as we see here in this image of soil under the microscope. Soil receives a lot of carbon-based materials, like plant residues, and soil basically acts as a biological incinerator, so to speak. Soil organisms are decomposing the plant residues, and this provides for growth of more organisms. So as a result, soils are just packed full of all kinds of microscopic organisms. And these organisms are very diverse, and they form a complex food web, not unlike other ecosystems. We just don't often think about the soil food web as much as maybe we think about other ecosystems, mostly because a lot of the players are microscopic or very, very tiny. So I'd like to introduce you to some of the main types of organisms that we would typically find in soil. This diagram shows some of the key groups of organisms, organized by size on the x-axis and abundance on the y-axis. You can see that soil organisms range in size from things that you can see with the naked eye, like earthworms, which are on the far right side, all the way down to organisms that can only be visualized with high-power microscopes, like the viruses on the far left side. We also see that these groups of organisms range in abundance in soil from just 1 or 2 in an area all the way up to billions per gram of soil. A gram is about a teaspoon of soil. So some of these groups are incredibly abundant. The most abundant entities that we find in soil are the viruses, shown at the top left corner of this graph. We typically would see about 1 billion viruses per teaspoon of soil. Now, we, of course, have been hearing a lot about a particular virus at the moment, but in the environment, in soil, the vast majority of viruses that we find are actually infecting bacteria and other microbes and are not pathogenic or harmful to us in any way or to other larger organisms. And these viruses are actually really important in terms of carbon cycling, and they help keep nutrients moving through soil. The next most abundant group are the bacteria and the archaea. These are unicellular microscopic organisms, usually about 1 to 3 microns in size. They tend to not be as remarkable in terms of shapes or morphologies because they're just single cells, but they're hugely diverse in terms of metabolism or how they make a living in soil. Bacteria and archaea can eat and respire things that most other organisms can't. So different types of bacteria and archaea can use a wide variety of both organic and inorganic compounds. And so by exploiting these different resources, they've been able to be very successful in soil and taking advantage of all the different heterogeneous pockets of resources in soils. Some of the more special groups of bacteria and archaea that are worth mentioning include the symbiotic nitrogen fixers that live in the root nodules of plants. These are very important in terms of providing nitrogen for leguminous plants. Cyanobacteria are an interesting group. They can photosynthesize or use sunlight to get energy, similar to the way plants do. And then actinomycetes. Actinomycetes are a group of bacteria that have a diverse array of metabolisms and are really important in breaking down tough molecules and polymers in the environment. They're also well known for their production of important secondary metabolites like antibiotics. So for example, the lower right picture is one of Streptomyces, an actinobacteria. And Streptomyces is famous for the production of streptomycin, which is one of the oldest antibiotics that we have in use. Actinobacteria also have another interesting claim to fame. They are actually what make soil smell like soil. So, you know, you go out after a rainstorm, especially that really earthy smell that to me smells very delicious. Well, that's actually a compound called geosmin, and that's produced by actinobacteria. So when you smell soil, when you smell dirt, you're actually smelling the bacteria that make their home in soil. The next group up is the fungi. Fungi have a diversity of morphologies and range in size from single-cell microscopic yeasts all the way up to large multicellular mushrooms that we can see with the naked eye. Many fungi have spreading filaments called hyphae, and they work a lot like plant roots in that they go out and explore the environment and help the fungi acquire nutrients. While fungi are typically not as numerous as bacteria, they're larger, and so they often make up the greatest biomass in soil, or the greatest weight in soil. One special group that's worth mentioning is mycorrhizal fungi. These are special fungi that form symbioses or relationships with plants, either inside the plant root in the case of endomycorrhizae, or on the outside of plant roots in the case of ectomycorrhizae. And they essentially help extend the plant's root network, helping the plant explore a greater area and acquire even more nutrients. Next group is the protists. These are microscopic unicellular organisms. They're eukaryotes, so they are a little bit larger and more complex than the unicellular bacteria and archaea that we talked about earlier. And protists usually fall into three main groups. Algae are kind of plant-like protists that can photosynthesize like plants, and we find them in aquatic systems and in moist soil systems. Protozoa are animal-like protists, and these include things like amoeba and ciliates, and they're really important in terms of feeding on bacteria and organic matter. A third group is the social protists, and they're kind of fungi-like. These include slime molds, which are these really fascinating organisms. They're single-celled organisms, but they have this amazing ability to aggregate together and act kind of like a larger multicellular organism when the time is right. Finally, we get to our largest organisms. Larger fauna include arthropods, worms, and other multicellular organisms. These fauna are important as secondary and tertiary members of the soil food web. They also play important roles in mixing soils by their movements and their burrowing. Of the larger fauna shown here, nematodes, which are actually classified as microfauna, are the most numerous. And while you may hear a lot about nematodes in terms of the parasitic or plant pathogen nematodes, because they get attention for the damage that they cause, most of the nematodes we find in soil are actually either harmless or even beneficial to the ecosystem. So now that we've covered some of the diverse organisms that live in soils, I wanted to turn our attention to what they are doing and some of the important services these organisms give to us. Perhaps one of the most important services that these organisms perform is decomposition. So as I mentioned before, soils receive a lot of plant residues, and the soil organisms are important for decomposing that organic matter and helping create soil organic matter and stabilizing soil organic matter. Soil organic matter is the non-living fraction of soil, and it's very important in providing carbon and nutrients to the system. And in addition, soil organic matter acts a little bit like a sponge and helps hold water. So soil organic matter also is important in regulating soil moisture. So without soil organisms, we wouldn't have either the formation or the stabilization of soil organic matter. Soil organic matter or soil organisms are also very important in mixing plant residues into soil in the first place. This is something called bioturbation. In this time-lapse video, you can see a layer of soil with some leaf litter on top. The panel on the right side has a full community of soil organisms that includes earthworms, potworms, springtails, mites, and isopods. And the one on the left has these larger soil fauna excluded. You will still see some fungal growth on the left side. So over the 15 weeks that this video was shot, you can see just how important the fauna are in terms of shredding and mixing the organic matter into soil. They're breaking up the larger pieces, and this gives more surface area for bacteria and fungi to access and decompose this leaf litter further. They're also dragging the pieces down into soil, mixing it into the soil layer, kind of acting like little plows. The activity up and down into the soil also helps aerate the soil and improves water infiltration into soil. Microbes also play key roles in nutrient cycles. As an example, here is a diagram of the nitrogen cycle, one of the more important when we think about crop growth. And this diagram shows all of the transformations and steps that are mediated by soil microbes. So we have nitrogen fixing bacteria that live either in the roots of leguminous crops or free living in the soil. They're important for converting atmospheric nitrogen into forms that are usable for plants. I already mentioned decomposer organisms, and so microbes that are decomposing are helping release nitrogen from plant litter, and they're helping to convert organic forms of nitrogen into ammonia. We have nitrifying bacteria. These are different groups that can convert ammonia ultimately to nitrate, again, converting that form of nitrogen in soil. And denitrifying bacteria are important in converting nitrates back to atmospheric nitrogen. And so you see that without microbes, with all these different players in the nitrogen cycle, we really wouldn't have a nitrogen cycle. Microbes are also important in terms of soil aggregate formation and stability. Microbes secrete gels and glues, and this helps stick soil particles together, forming aggregates. Stable aggregates, and then the pore spaces or empty spaces between them, is what gives soil its structure. And good soil structure helps contribute to root aeration, water infiltration, and helps reduce erosion. So when we think about managing our soils to promote soil health, I'd like to offer you my perspective as a biologist. So my thinking on this is we have all of these organisms in soil performing a diversity of important functions. So managing for soil health can be thought of as keeping the soil organisms happy. And what do all organisms ultimately need to be happy? 3 basic things: food, water, and shelter. So in the case of soil organisms, the food is primarily coming in as organic matter, as these plant residues that kind of feed the decomposers at the base of that soil food web. Shelter is having a well-structured soil where these organisms can live, so good stable aggregates and pore spaces in between where they can move and get at food and water. And water, of course, is something that all organisms need to live. And the ways that we manage for healthy soils help contribute to these 3 things and help promote these soil organisms. So for example, adding organic amendments like green manure, compost, using crop rotation and cover crops all helps add organic matter back into the system. So that's providing food for our microbes. Reducing disturbance like reducing tillage or overgrazing helps maintain soil structure. So it helps keep the microbes' house intact and gives them a place to live and move and do what they need to do. And in managing both organic matter and soil structure, we're also helping to control soil moisture dynamics. Organic matter acts as a sponge and holds water in, and having a well-structured soil allows excess water to drain out when it needs to. And these management practices and their effects on microbes, it's not just theoretical. We actually have some data from some of our plots showing how soil microbes respond to some of these management approaches. So we've been working, for example, at the long-term continuous cotton plots in Jackson. So when we compare the tilled and the no-till and the conventional till plots at this site, and we look at a variety of microbial measures, we see that no-till, which is shown in the white bars on the graph, actually has increased microbial enzyme activity. Here I'm showing one particular enzyme called beta-glucosidase, which is one that is important in decomposing organic matter. The other thing we notice is that in no-till plots, we actually see different types of microbes. So we tend to see more gram-positive bacteria, actinomycetes, and mycorrhizae fungi. And these are some of the more important groups in terms of decomposing complex organic matter and in terms of acquiring nutrients. So we actually see promotion of some of the more desirable groups of microbes under our no-till plots. We've also been looking at the effect of cover crops. In particular, at these plots, we've been comparing hairy vetch to wheat to no cover over the winter. And one of the things that we're continually finding is that in the hairy vetch plots, we're seeing higher microbial enzyme activities. And in particular, we're seeing higher indicators of nitrogen cycling under hairy vetch plots, including microbial biomass and a variety of enzymes related to nitrogen cycling and enhanced respiration and nitrification rates. So we're seeing that the way we manage our soils does have a very measurable effect on the microbes and some of the services they provide in soil. So in summary, soil is an incredibly diverse living ecosystem, and soil organisms are providing us with a number of agronomically and environmentally important services. Finally, managing for soil health promotes microbial activity and functioning in soil. Thank you.